MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 31.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. Here's your host, Nathan Pierce.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related with the focus for people looking at starting their own microbrewery or wanting to take their existing brewery to the next level. I am your host, Nathan Pierce. Thanks for listening in, everybody. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show in iTunes or Stitcher. Your honest feedback will help me improve, and it helps the show show up in searches for anybody else who's looking for this kind of thing. In this episode, I talk with Audra Gajunas from Brewed for Her Ledger out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Eric Allen from Studio Brew mentioned Brewed for Her Ledger in episode 25. So I thought I'd give Audra a call, and right away I was kind of interested because she said she runs a half marathon each year in a new place that she's ever been to. So I thought that was so cool because on my very first blog post at nathanpierce.me, I wrote about running the Bay to Breakers in San Francisco. I mean, I'm not a runner by any means. That's like a quarter of a marathon. I think it's 7.5 miles, and it totally kicked my butt. So I thought that was really cool what Audra does about the half marathon in a new place. But she has worked as an accountant, CFO, and a controller and whatnot for different breweries like Dogfish Head and Mother Earth. She says, numbers tell a story. I bring order to chaos. But she does a lot more than accounting. She does business plans, pro forma, operational audits. She can set up the software, and she has costing templates. So she has lots of great insight on a bunch of different aspects. And special for this episode, Audra agreed to answer any question you have about the things we talk about in this episode. So go to the show notes at microbrewer.com/session31 and leave your questions for Audra in the comments. And she agreed to check out the questions there for the next 30 days and answer as many as she can get to. And by the way, Tiffany Adamowski also agreed to answer questions. She showed up in MicroBrewr Podcast episode 29. So go over there and leave some questions for her too. Anyways, it's a long episode this time. There's so much great information. I'm just going to get right into it. Here's the interview. Hey, Audra, I introduced you to the listeners. Let's take a few minutes and you can tell us more about you and your business.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks, Nathan. My name is Audra Gajunas. I come from the beer world of about 6 years now, having worked for Dogfish Head as their controller and CFO of Mother Earth Brewing in North Carolina. I currently own my own consultancy called Brewed for Her Ledger, and I provide accounting, finance, and operational strategy, consulting advice to startup and existing breweries, brew pubs, beer bars, suppliers, basically everybody that's associated with the beer business on the craft side. Anything from accounting information systems to implementation to project management through a brewery's build out. Kind of a one-stop shop mercenary CFO for hire. That makes sense.
How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this full-time since January. I started my business in May of last year, but I found that I had to continue to turn offers and inquiries down because I just didn't have time, having been working full-time for Mother Earth. So I sat down third quarter of last year and I started to do the math, thinking, well, what if all these people that I kept saying no to, like, I can't help out, I just don't have time, I said yes to, would I actually be able to make a living off of this? And did the math and thought, you know what, if not now, when? This is a great time for us in the craft beer industry. We're growing so quickly. There's so many of us. There's over 3,000 of us now. And where could I offer a greater amount of help? Would it be to continue to work with one brewery as it continues to grow, or a bunch of different startup breweries and see if this flies? So I decided to go out on my own, and I have been doing that since January, and I have never been busier my entire life, honestly. But I love it. I love every day of it.
What's keeping you busy right now? Trying to find clients, or already do you have enough clients? Are you still looking for more?
I'm working with between 9 and 12 breweries every single month. So where I'm being busiest right now, writing business plans. I am vetting pro formas of several breweries. I'm writing business plans of several breweries. So making sure that I'm on top of all the revisions, getting contact information for potential investors, really a lot of communication. I spent a lot of time in the emails and conference calls, reviewing different drafts of plans, finding revisions, making sure that costs are captured appropriately by recipe for each one of these breweries. So I spend quite a bit of time doing that. So that's where I'm mostly immersed. And then writing proposals. I'm a one-stop shop, so I'm writing all my own proposals that are out there. And then working with one software implementation for a brewery that is in the DC area right now. So my clients are from all over, but I'm mostly spending my time doing a lot of business plan review work and creation.
What kind of software are you talking about when you say you're developing software?
Software, I'm designing. So what I like to do is I like to design accounting information systems for breweries based on what their long-term goals are going to be. So we sit down, when looking at software, we sit down and figure out what long-term goals are. Where are the success metrics? Where do you see yourself in the next year, in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you want to be this sort of corner bar, brew pub bar with about the same amount of beerage production that you want to provide in the community, or do you want to be a regional player? Obviously, those goals are going to be drastically different between the different types of breweries. So you design your accounting info systems accordingly so that as you pull reports and information off of your system, they are providing that guidance or that path towards what your ultimate long-term goals are. So this will be your financial management system from, it could be Vicinity, Great Plains, one hooks up into the other. This could be orchestrated beer. It could be an SAP product. It could be Sage, QuickBooks. A lot of breweries use QuickBooks, even though I do not endorse it. But everybody has to start somewhere, and a lot of people do start out with QuickBooks. Then it also extends into your point of sale. So the point of sale that you choose to capture all of your sales through your tap room. And if you have a brew pub, your food sales and everything else otherwise. It's important that you capture all that data, especially beer and how much you sell, so that you can pay your monthly excise tax, both federal and state, correctly. And in case you do get audited, you have financial records to come back to. So it's just about designing systems smartly for a brewery so that they are given the information that they need to grow successfully and sustainably.
You got a lot going on. There's a lot of different ways that you can help breweries. And I understand you just got back from Eugene, Oregon.
Yes. Oh my goodness, Eugene, Oregon. What a beautiful city. And the state of Oregon I absolutely love to start with. But I just spent a week with Ninkasi Brewing, shadowing them and interning with them. I had a class that I took back in May. His Advanced Craft Brewery Startup Workshop that Oregon State University was putting on. And I had an investor pay me to take to make sure that we were assembling all of his business plan and his future plans for this 30-barrel production brewery startup here out of Raleigh. And I went out there, and the deliverable there was a business plan. So at the end of the class, in order for you to truly say you've completed it, you turn in a business plan. Well, there were 14 students in my class. We all turned in our business plans, and then there was a selection committee that included Ninkasi Brewing that decided to choose the best, business plan, or the winning business plan, so to say, to spend a week with them, interning them with them in areas that you wanted to work in. So my plan won, which I was extremely excited about. I cried when I got that email. I was so happy. I was like, oh my goodness, Ninkasi. I love Ninkasi.
Yeah, I'm a fan too.
Yeah, I spent a week there, and I focused really on the production side, the technical side. They've gone through this amazing build out now with a 90-barrel brew house and a facility that just blew me away. I mean, they have a rock climbing wall for their employees painted in hot vines. They have a recording studio. They just have this amazing experience for their employees that is part of their culture that they've really woven in tightly. But, with that whole build out, there are mistakes that they made and there are lessons that they learned that they were very open in sharing with me. So one of the main areas that I focused on is I sat down with their CFO, Nigel Francisco, and went through their whole expansion plan. And he was very open in talking about, what kind of wall materials do we use for this? And, here's the lessons that we learned on this stainless, or have this contingency plan in place, etc. As they're going through their massive build out, the lessons that they learned so that I could bring those lessons back. And if I'm acting as a project manager for these startup breweries throughout build out, I have these lessons now that I've learned from Ninkasi that I can share with these breweries. So really focused on the startup side and what I could apply to the startup side, but also the production side. I had never worked on a commercial brew house before. I'm a home brewer, but if you ask me to brew a beer on a 30-barrel system, I have no idea how to do it. If I had to rebuild a pump, how do I do it? I don't know. So I spent some time with their maintenance team as well, and Paul, their overall VP of operations, and just learned a lot about how these different systems work on their brew house and in their facility, the different packaging lines that they have, the history. Also spent some time with marketing, spent some time with organizational development, but I really wanted to focus more on the technical side. So they embraced me with open arms and provided me so much knowledge that I'm nothing but grateful for them. And Nikos was great too. I met Nikos. He was the first person I sat down with for an hour and just had a one-on-one conversation. And pretty much everyone from the executive leadership team I sat down with a one-on-one for a minimum of an hour. And we just had a conversation. And these guys are great. They're onto something great. They're going to do 105,000 barrels this year. And they're really involved with their community. And it shows. And it's exciting. It's really exciting what they're doing out in Oregon. And I really hope that what I learned over there, I can bring back to the East Coast. And we can start building what they've already done out there for years.
Yeah, it's super exciting what they have going on. And I'm a fan of Ninkasi. It's one of the main things that got me over the top excited about craft beer was when I met a couple of the guys in a friend's wedding last year. But Nikos was on MicroBrewr podcast episode 10. So listeners, you could check that out at microbrewer.com/session10.
Excellent. Yeah, he was great.
So I really wanted to talk with you, Audra, about accounting.
Yes.
That's where I heard you have, I don't know, maybe is it the place that you have the most expertise? It seems like that's where you can help people a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Accounting, finance, and operations just in general. But my background, my degree is accounting. And I have my MBA from Carolina, from Keenan Flagler Business School. But I really focus on accounting and finance and overall strategies.
Let's start with accounting, because accounting really starts before the breweries even open. I mean, developing my business plan, I was going through lots of numbers, and I have maybe too many spreadsheets in my Excel book with so many lines of, costs and trying to figure out where the income's going to go and where the taxes are going to go. So I have some questions that I've already outlined about accounting, but first I want to understand a basic principle. Tell me, what is the difference between an accountant and a bookkeeper? That's something that I don't fully understand yet.
Sure, no problem. A bookkeeper typically has less education and experience. They typically have a 2-year degree and are really transactionally focused. So these are the people that are going to be entering in your receipts, paying bills, creating invoices, things that are sort of basic and transactional. An accountant requires that you have a 4-year degree. You may or may not have a CPA designation or a CMA designation, but the big difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant is a bookkeeper typically has a 2-year degree, and an accountant actually has a 4-year degree. So the accountant has the capability to do more of a strategic overview, work on budgets, and create more complex transactions. So accounting for things like financial hedging, spot rates, depreciation schedules. These are things that accountants typically do versus the bookkeepers that are more entering in input, AP, AR, which can be part of an accountant's responsibilities, but accountants go a little bit one step further and are really making sure that the expenses are realized in the right trend with the revenue in the right periods and are governed by the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the FASB pronouncement, so all the rules and regulations that come out and how you recognize revenue and expenses and how you account for transactions. We really have to sort of keep knowledge and on top of that. And a bookkeeper doesn't necessarily have to do that. It's just more day-to-day type work.
Does the accountant do bookkeeping?
An accountant can certainly do bookkeeping, but
Okay.
A bookkeeper does not typically do accounting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm starting to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I always like to start with mistakes because from the low point,
Sure.
it only gets better. So what are some of the mistakes that you see startup breweries doing that could easily be avoided?
Absolutely. I touched on it before, and this is, I think, the number one mistake that could easily be avoided is breweries don't have enough working capital on hand at the inception of operations. So they think that 1 or 2 months worth of cash on hand is going to be enough. And they're not planning for, I can already say off the bat, you will be gloriously inefficient in your first year. But especially the first 6 months, as you're trying to get all the pieces coming together, there'll be a while before you're actually recognizing any income. But at the same time, you are brewing all this beer and investing money in people, so cash is coming out the door really quickly. So they're very commonly undercapitalized. And you could easily build that into your business plan in your sources and uses statement. So you'll have this certain amount of money that you know that you have on hand. You have a little bit of an extra cushion. But then you have these operations that you need to be funding that you may not have planned for. So I always look at a rule of thumb, a minimum of 3 months of cash on hand and access to working capital of 6 months on hand. This would be your absolute minimum. So this would be something like, let's say you go to your bank and you get a line of credit. Make sure that your line of credit can cover up to 6 months worth of your outflows from your profit and loss statement. So look at your cash flow statement, but also look at your profit and loss, where you expect all this cash to come out. Look at 6 months worth and make sure that your line of credit can cover that, just in case. So that's one thing. Breweries don't have enough working capital on hand at inception of operations. Another one that I see, another mistake, is they don't spend enough time planning for their information flow through the brewery. So you'll have a brewmaster that has planned for the layout of the brew house, of the packaging line, of how they are going to see the beer flow through, but they don't necessarily plan for that information flow that comes along with it. So how are you going to be accepting inventory in the door? Who's going to accept it? How are you going to indicate it in your financial management system? Who takes responsibility for that? As ingredients are coming in the door and beer is brewed, are there recipes that have already been created? How is that reflected in your financial management system, in your books? How are you doing that? When paper is not enough, in order for you to pull data as you're growing at an exponential and or really fast rate, you need to be able to have access to this data. But that comes with, and it starts with, great planning process of information flow. So that people don't spend enough time planning for information flow through the brewery. They're building it out and then not thinking through, well, where am I going to capture all these different data points?
You're saying when the brewer orders ingredients, he needs to make sure that he tells the accountant about the expenses that he just made?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But even in a more robust financial management system, as ingredients are coming in the door, you should be accepting them into your inventory in your system so that you have real-time inventory on hand, or at least very close to real-time inventory. If you don't tell your accountant, you don't tell your brewers that, or if you are the brewer, you just accept the grain. Let's say the big shipment comes in from BSG, and you're not telling anybody else, you're just brewing the beer. Who knows how much each pound, of grain has really truly cost you? And how do you appropriately cost out your beer then, if you're not putting that into your system? It's not just enough to brew the beer and have a good layout of a brewery. You really need to have a good layout and a good design of your accounting. So that's another thing. And then the third thing is in your brewery build-outs. As breweries are being built out, make sure to have enough of a contingency percentage built into that. So don't take it as gospel. If you have your general contractor come to you and you think you've figured out every component that you're going to need, you should still put in another 10 to 15% because there will be change orders. Nothing ever goes to budget. There will always be some sort of holdup for one reason or other. And just make sure you have a percentage built into your contingency. So usually brewers are very aggressive on the profit and loss statements, aggressive on sales and not aggressive enough on expenses. So that's part of what I do when I review business plans and pro formas, that I sort of temper expectations and I'm a little bit more aggressive on expenses. But those are easily avoidable by having an independent set of eyes. Look at your profit and loss statement. Look at your cash flow statement. Somebody who's knowledgeable in the beer industry, but isn't necessarily tied to your brewery because you may be too close to those numbers and you want someone that's independent to look at them. So that could be easily avoided through review. Planning, just plan for information flow. And that really comes from knowing where you want to be with your brewery. Where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself? Who do you want to interact with? Are you going to use a wholesaler? Are you only going to self-distribute? Are you going to have an on-site tap room? Are you going to have a restaurant? All that has to be planned out really well, and that really comes from you as the founder, as the owner. Where do you see yourself and where do you see your brewery going? Because everything you do from that point on stems off where you see it all coming from, where it stems from, where it comes from.
So bottom line is be as detailed as you can and then get more detailed.
Yeah, details are important, but be as detailed as you can in what you define as what your success metrics are. So yes, follow generally accepted accounting principles in setting up your financial statement to meet those absolutely legal requirements of what you need. But also, you really only need the detail of where you want to measure yourself as you continue to grow. So, you could look at, if it's maintenance, let's say something that you're passionate about maintenance or maintenance department, you could break it down into every single category, like replacement parts, fencing, repairs. There could be something that's very detailed there. But I think where you're going to be spending more time is looking at making sure your accounting system is got appropriate metrics for mix, by brand, by packaging type. And if you have a tap room, I would separate it out from the brewery and keep them as separate profit and loss centers, because typically you're going to be a lot more profitable through your tasting room than you are through your production side. You just don't want to muddle those. You don't want to muddle the profitability percentages together. So yeah, be detailed, keep good records. You want to be able to, a good way that I look at it is that if I'm an absolute stranger, I'm an auditor, and I'm an absolute stranger, Can I come in and look at your books and understand what has happened based on the numbers? Can I see a story as a complete stranger who has no tie to your numbers? And if the answer is no, then perhaps your records are not detailed enough. And you may find yourself in trouble with the Department of Revenue of your particular state or the feds, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So just keep good enough records. It shows a good paper trail, but it also it shows the story behind your brewery.
Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it, because my finances are going to need to be vetted or checked by the appropriate governing agencies. And if any stranger can't figure it out, then those guys can't figure it out either. And they're going to think that I'm lying or just not keeping good records. So my stuff needs to be really clear also.
Yes, definitely. Clear. So accuracy, of course, is important, but completeness is even more important. So you can forgive for little mistakes in accuracy, but if there are absolute gaps of information that you have not tracked, that you need to track, that a governing agency would be looking for, that's only going to bring about future audits. You already now raised a red flag in one area. So what's that? Not to say that they're going to communicate that with another governing agency and they'll come and audit you on another facet. It's being very transparent with your financial data, but at least you don't have to the public. But if you had a stranger come in, I mean, that's the way I would look at it. If you had a stranger come in and they cannot understand what has happened, over the past year just by looking at your numbers, nobody else will be able to either. And they'll default to, you owe more money, or you can't prove this, so here's a penalty. And if you are starting to fall behind in your financial record keeping and having clear data, and you start to get these different notices that are coming in from the federal, from the IRS, or from your Department of Revenue, that may be a sign that you should hire somebody to do that for you. Because I know you're going to be extremely busy brewing, packaging, managing wholesalers. There's so many different moving parts out there that you may consider accounting and finance to be ancillary or to be just like sort of thorn in your side. But truly, that is what helps you run your business. And when you're going to be looking for a loan for expansion from a bank, if you have poor financial records, good luck getting a loan from a bank. That's the most important thing that you need in order. I mean, that's your tool to continue to grow. So take good care of it. Even if it's not your area of expertise or your area of background, hire someone to do it for you. Believe me, the investment will be worth it.
So one question that I want to ask is how I know when I need to hire somebody. But before we get there, you're giving me so many things to think about. Tell me some tools that I can use to make sure my finances and accounting stay in good shape for my brewery.
I would say create a routine for your admin, for your accounting side, and stick to it. So let's say every Friday, if you're only a one-person shop, or you've got 3 people and you're not ready or you can't outsource out your bookkeeping, every Friday set aside, the 2 hours that you enter in all the invoices and pay all the invoices. Make sure, I would say the tool is to either take a class or get yourself a good primer on what a balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow look like and how they interact with each other. So that on Fridays when you're paying, let's say Friday, it could be any day, but when you're paying bills, you see how much cash is in bank, you understand what that means, and you have enough cash going forward. Just reviewing books in general, I would review books at least on a weekly basis to see what's coming in, what's going out, if there's anything that's concerning. Always review your cash situation. So I almost do it on a daily basis with other breweries, but at least weekly. So you see where your cash is sitting and where it's going. Other tools that I like to use are just Excel spreadsheets. I know it's like the bane of some people's existence, but you're really looking for data points, and you may have little analyses that you have to run here or there, but I use those. Communication. communication with everybody that's involved in the brewery. You would not necessarily think that communication is related to accounting and finance so much, but when you're trying to start up a business and open doors, the lack of communication may end up causing you to pay more for a particular service or for ingredients because you didn't have that conversation, or neither of you talked to somebody outside for this hop harvest, and now the hops are coming in and they're coming in at a higher rate. So strong communication plan. I mean, I think that really translates into more efficient operations, which will turn into a higher amount of cash. And the most important thing is understanding how much your beer costs at any point in time. So I like to review that per run. I have a costing template that I developed back in 2011 that incorporates raw materials, direct labor, and an overhead rate. And it gives me a true cost per run per beer by package type. You will be surprised at how many breweries have no idea how much their beer costs. None. They're like, they see cash in the door and cash out the door, and they're like, hey, as long as I have cash, I'm okay. But if you ask them, how much did this run of this amber, or this Kolsch cost you on Tuesday? This whole run of beer that you packaged on Tuesday, how much did that cost per can or per bottle? 90% of them will not be able to tell you what that is. So that, to me, is extremely concerning. You really need to have a good grasp, a good handle on your costs, and understand where they're coming from and how they're flowing through your product. And without that, you will be lost. So understand how much your beer costs. Do that. And then build a budget. That's another tool to have that people don't build a budget enough or quickly enough or review it. If you have a budget to work with, it at least provides you sort of a framework of expectations of where you see your money going and what you want to do with it. So I think that's a great practice to have too. On an annual basis, have a budget, review it monthly, compare your actuals to your budget, and see where it's trending, and then make adjustments as you need to. Hope those are some good tools, tricks.
Totally. I was taking notes. So set aside time each week to handle your paperwork. Take a class at the community college on cash flow. Use Microsoft Excel so you can keep track and analyze data pretty easily. Communication is super important. Most important is understanding how much your beer costs at any given time, and especially build a budget annually and review it monthly to make sure you're sticking on track.
Yes. And if you aren't, which will happen, you have time to make adjustments before it's too late, before you run out of cash or opportunities for working capital. Because you want to keep your investors happy. Even if that's just you want to keep them happy.
All of this stuff is like living documents, right? It changes along. We need to use adaptive management and make adjustments as we move along, right?
Absolutely. Nothing is ever, especially in our industry, because of how our growth rate and our growth plans are, they will always be changing. And it drives most accountants nuts. I promise you that. Most accountants do not like something that is not set in stone and sits there for, with a regular basis. You can be very confident you set a standard operating procedure, and 3 months later it no longer applies. You know what you do? You write a new operating procedure and you stick to that one until it doesn't work either. There's no reason to be frustrated about it, but you have to be very open and willing to embrace change, because that will be the true constant that you will have as you open and you run your brewery. You will always be changing. Departments will be changing. People's roles will be changing. One person could be another person's boss 3 months later. That's no longer the case. So having a lot of flexibility, adaptive management, as you mentioned, yes. And make sure your numbers are reflecting that. So that's just staying on top of that on the number side. And a lot of that can be managed or alleviated by having a good financial management structure and system in place to do that work for you. You're not forcing things to work. That system's doing the work for you and giving you the information you need for your decision making.
Okay, I want to at least touch on taxes. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it's probably a whole nother episode in itself. But I recently read a comment at the end of a blog somewhere that said 40% of the price of beer is actually taxes. So what do we need to know about taxes for a brewery?
You have quite a few of them, and you need to make sure that you're filing them on a regular basis, on a monthly basis for most of them, depending on your size, of course. But if you're doing payroll taxes, if you're processing payroll in-house, you have federal income tax, state income tax, both federal and state unemployment tax to worry about. On the beer side, you have your federal excise tax, you have your state excise tax, you'll have your state sales and use tax. Sometimes you have mill and machinery tax, and then of course you have to file your TTB Brewers Report of Operations. But that federal excise and state excise tax do get pricey. Federal excise, as you know, is going to be $7 per barrel. State excise tax is usually done in gallons, and depending on your state, it could be really small to, like, I'm based out of North Carolina, and I believe we're the 9th highest in the country with 61.71 cents per gallon. So that's on top of your federal excise tax that you have. And it gets really pricey. So that's where also, understanding your cost of your beer does come into play, because taxes will take a big chunk of it. And state excise is usually filed monthly. You may file it if you're self-distributing, you will be responsible for it. If you are using a wholesaler, oftentimes they take care of that as part of their distribution agreement. And then federal excise, of course, you're paying on your own. And for most of the small breweries, you're paying it on a quarterly basis. Once you hit a certain size, of course, then it's monthly, but most of them are quarterly. And then sales and use. All your t-shirts, anything that you're selling through the tap room, merchandise. There could be other things that apply, but sales and use tax also comes into play. That may be a pass-through. It may not be. It may be all-inclusive. Depends on how you set up your accounting system to start with.
What are the agencies that we need to go to for all these things?
You're going to go to the TTB. You're going to go to your state's Department of Revenue. Most everything will be through your state's Department of Revenue. But your TTB will be your federal side. State sales and use, of course, DOR. So get to be good friends with your state's Department of Revenue. The same people that you pay your state income tax to, but when you file your federal return on an annual basis and you have your state return that comes through as well, that's the same department. You'll just have like a small sub-department that is focused on excise that will be working with you on the beer side, but it's your state's department.
Okay, so accounting was complicated and it got even more complicated with taxes. So how do I know when I need to send my financial work or accounting out to someone else, or even just hire somebody in-house, like a bookkeeper or accountant inside my brewery on staff?
Once you feel that you're falling behind on things, you're not entering things on a weekly or every other week basis. If you cannot provide an outside person, including yourself, a profit and loss statement on a monthly basis, once you feel overwhelmed, start getting notices from either your state's Department of Revenue saying that you missed this tax return, you missed that return, or that records aren't matching up. That may be a time that you should really start considering hiring somebody else to do that work for you, because timeliness is so important when it comes to bookkeeping, to record keeping. And if you don't have the time to do it and it's not your area of background, hire somebody else to do it. That to me is the biggest indicator. You start to feel overwhelmed and you're starting to fall behind in getting things filed and or entered in a timely manner.
Is this going to be somebody that I just contract with and I just talk with them once a month, or are they on staff?
It depends. It depends on how much money you have and what you have set aside for resources and what you place in importance. It's very easy to start out with a bookkeeper that could be local, that may not necessarily have a beer background, but if you're using them just to input your receipts, your bills, invoices, they don't necessarily have to have a beer background. And they're pretty economical. And that way you don't have a full employee on staff whose benefits and taxes you have to worry about. You just pay them their rate and be done with it and let them worry about it. Someone on staff, you'll bring about, you could from the inception, somebody, maybe one of your owners or your co-founders has an accounting and finance background, and they will grow into that role and take care of that internally. It's really looking at, I would really start out with a contract basis. And as you build a relationship with somebody, as your brewery continues to grow, you may want to bring them in-house. Or you continue to contract with them. It depends on what your needs are. There really is no like one best way, but you could easily start out with a contractor to do your bookkeeping for you, and keep it local if possible.
So yeah, one question was I was going to ask if they can do it over the internet.
Yeah, there's a lot of bookkeeping agencies that are going to be in towns that focus on that. Most are like $15 to $25 an hour, so that's not that bad. That is not something that I do, but in my area, I have different bookkeeping agencies and bookkeepers that I will refer breweries to do some more of that day-to-day work. I don't really come in until it's more of like a monthly close. You're closing the books, reviewing the books, making sure everything is input to more strategic work. So I work hand in hand with a bookkeeper or an on-staff accountant that they have on site. And I'm just making sure that everything is input appropriately.
Okay, if I can't handle all of my receipts for all my expenses and stuff, it's good to have a bookkeeper in town. I could just drop off a box of receipts every week or every month, and then the accountant's going to be checking that stuff to make sure it's all in order.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. If you don't have time to do it yourself, outsource it and do it as quickly as possible just to make sure that you have complete record.
Don't want to fall behind. So how do I make sure I'm hiring the right person? Obviously interview, I think, is probably the most easy way. I like using LinkedIn too to look at people's backgrounds, and nothing really substitutes for a face-to-face conversation. If you have the opportunity, I like sit down and talk to them about it and see where their background is. Some bookkeepers have worked for large corporations and may not necessarily work well for a small business. Some have a lot of small business startup background and may be able to offer you some additional help beyond just basic bookkeeping because of where they come from. It may not necessarily translate to beer, but culturally they may be a better fit. I mean, I think personality fit is also really important. You need to be able to feel that you can sit down and have an honest conversation, especially when things are not going as smoothly as you would have hoped with the brewery. They may have some understanding on that too, but you want to be able to jive with them. They're the ones who are providing you your information, so you want to be able to get along with them. Personality fit is important to a degree, but I would really look at their background. Where does their bookkeeping background come from? And is that a fit for me? Just basically look at their resume and see if they've done this work for some other company, or is there some kind of qualifications and education that they need to have?
That's where LinkedIn, I think, really comes into play. But asking them, you want them to at least have a 2-year degree. Another opportunity would be finding an accounting intern at a university. So they may not have necessarily gotten their 4-year degree yet, but want to get some experience. So hire them over the summer and have them do bookkeeping work. And that sort of gives you an opportunity to test them out. And they could possibly be a full-time employee upon graduation for you. But that you can get them a little bit more economically that way, and as they're being an intern for you. And you also have the opportunity for a personality fit. So there are other sources. It's not necessarily just in-town professional outfits. Take a look at their backgrounds and get references from their professors. We have some whip-smart accountants-to-be out there that are available on the cheap that want to work in beer. Believe me, there are a lot of people that want to work in beer.
Everybody wants to work in beer.
And you can find a lot of students that be willing to work for next to nothing, which is great for you because they're going to be with you from the ground on up. And if you like them, they graduate, boom, they have a 4-year degree Now they can be your accountant on staff if you want to hire them. If not, no harm, no foul. You helped each other out when you needed it most.
Okay, now we have a question from one of our listeners.
Sure.
And actually, I have a couple questions from some of our listeners because we have comments from listeners that have come in on Twitter and Facebook and the website and stuff. And there's been a few questions asked about accounting. So first I'm going to start with Orlando, who asked in a comment on episode 23, how do some breweries buy or lease a building for sometimes years while they're still completing the renovations and licenses?
They have funds already in place. So they're either self-funding it. They have family or friends that are providing them that money so that they have rent. A lot of them still have their full-time jobs. So they have their income coming in from whatever they're doing on their, day-to-day basis, IT, production, whatever, in their other field before they've actually opened the brewery. So they'll typically be working their day jobs and then working on the licenses and everything at night. And this is a labor of love. Sometimes you'll have a granting agency or an economic development commission within the county or the city that has provided a grant or an opportunity for funding, to lease a particular building, especially if it's in a distressed area of town. You could sell some merchandise, but that's not ever going to typically cover your rents. This is already funded at this point in time, either by self or there's funds available. So most do not give up their full-time jobs until they have their licenses in place and everything is really clicking and they have additional funding in place.
Well, that leads to the next question from Dan. He actually commented on episode 23 too. He asks, how much capital does a brewery need to start up and where can they get the capital?
That is a very far-spanning question. Depends on what, it starts out with how much capital do you need. Depends on the size of your brew house and what your overall goals are. Are you going to be a small little tap room and a brew pub that's on site with a 3-barrel? Or are you going to start out as a production brewery with a wholesaler in place? Are you going to be upfitting an old building, an existing building? Or are you going to be building something from the ground on up? It could be, at the absolute minimum of what I've worked with through build-outs, and that would be an upfit for a 7-barrel system. That was roughly $650,000. But you could go into the millions easily. It really depends. You have to look at, what I would suggest as a starting point is to create a sources and uses statement and figure out what your size of your brew house is going to be and what in your location, what kind of upfit costs you need. And then it sort of builds from there. And you can figure out how much your beer is going to cost, all that, from that point on. But it's such a far-spanning question. Well, what size brew house, you really are working with and what your goals are.
Yeah, there's a gigantic range of expenses that it could be. Nigel Askew from Horsefly Brewing Company in Colorado commented in MicroBrewr podcast episode 18 that he actually started his brewery for $18,000. And then other breweries have started for millions of dollars. So if you want to hear about Nigel's story, listeners, you can go to microbrewer.com/session18. So Audra, where are some places that people could get funding though?
Sure, on funding. Some people, and I do not recommend this, but some people do that. They cash in their 401ks because this is their lifelong passion. They're retired. This is where they see themselves going, so they decide to do that. It comes from family. It comes from friends. It comes from lending institutions, credit unions, banks. The Small Business Administration, they have a 504 loan program that you should use or you take advantage of. See if you can apply for that for your equipment loans. Oftentimes they will give you a loan that will cover up to 85% to 90% of your equipment costs. And, for that you need some financial statements, but they provide those. I would look at your city, county, economic development commissions perhaps, not necessarily art councils, but there are similar ones that are focused on economic development, especially in distressed areas. So let's say an industry has moved on and it's basically decimated the county economically. There are often programs that are put in place by either the city, the county, and or the state to bring economic revitalization back. So for us in here in North Carolina, for example, Eastern North Carolina, tobacco and textile industries died out a long time ago, or are on the verge of dying out. So that there were many farmers that are no longer growing tobacco, and other people that are skilled tradespeople that don't have jobs. So if you're providing them job, then the state of North Carolina has something called the Golden Leaf Foundation and Awards. There are other agencies out there that do something similar. But I would look at all the grants that are available. I would look at Economic Development Commission for your particular city or county, and crowdfunding. I have kind of mixed reviews, and I sort of feel mixed about it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it also it forces you to make sure that you have really good records, because this is a lot of money coming in, and if you don't have it set aside for a particular purpose, it'll be taxed as regular income to you, and you want to minimize the amount of taxes that you're paying as you're building out a brewery when you need every single bit of cash. People forget about that tax, that they have to pay taxes on that. I think that covers most of the gamut. Have some good friends, Hey, Mom and Dad, I want to build a brewery.
Yeah, that
you don't really want to move
options.
to Florida, do you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, now it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little bit lighter. We're going to get to know each other a little better and have some fun. Get inside the industry. Are you ready, Audra?
Absolutely. I was born ready. Woo!
Okay, let's blast through these. Cans or bottles?
I like cans. I like they're more environmentally friendly. They are not rising at the cost that glass is. I'm always looking on the newer and greater sort of things, and I really like cans. I like them for transportation. I like bringing them to a beach. I like bringing them camping. So much easier than bottles, and lighter. And in general, cheaper. So cans for me.
And you homebrew too, I believe.
Yes.
What's the most challenging beer you've ever made?
It is sitting in fermentation right now. It's a funky little saison that I went a little heavy on acidulated malt, but it's the same base beer. I brewed 12 gallons. It's sitting in two different buckets with a 3711 yeast from Weiss, and so I have a French saison yeast in one. I have a Belgian yeast in the other, the Belle Saison from Lallemand. So it's getting, it's working with both of those yeasts, I think, and making sure that I don't get too many funky off flavors based on my recipe. So that's so far the most challenging. I think I started out as a home brewer from all grain. I never did extract. So I think that was challenging too, and just learning the overall brewing process in all grain and having 55% grain efficiency, which made a great 2.8% smoked porter, was also challenging. But that's where I sit right now. This funky little saison. I hope it's good. Fingers and toes crossed.
Okay, you got a funky saison waiting to be ready. Let's say you're going to make a 5-gallon batch again this weekend. What beer would you make?
I would like to do a Berliner Weiss with peaches.
Yeah, peach Berliner Weiss.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely want to do something like that, but I need to have a lagering unit. Right now, the makeshift kegerator is filled with kegs of beer already homebrewed and on tap. I have several many gallons of buckets sitting here. Still under 200 gallons if the TTV is listening. But
You got to throw a party and empty out that kegerator so you can
I
lager
know.
that Berliner Weiss.
I could do a peach Berliner Weiss. Yeah, I would
So,
love to do that.
tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
I think sessionable lagers, session lagers are going to be ones that are gaining more attention. Everybody's sort of going with these extreme beers and these funky little like seasonals and how crazy can I get this beer and how hoppy can I get this beer. I think there will be some palate weariness and people will want to come back to a solid beer that they can drink day in, day out after, mowing the lawn or household chores or just having a hard day that isn't necessarily going to make them, knock them in their seat. And having a good sessionable lager I don't think enough people are paying attention to that style and making it sessionable, just something solid. So you can see the success of what Shift has done for New Belgium. And I think that you'll see more of that coming along soon.
Yeah, I think those lighter beers are a big future for craft beer, and I wrote about that on my own blog at nathanpierce.me. It's the one that says what San Francisco Giants Brewfest taught me about the future of lagers.
Oh, cool. I'll have to go check that post out.
So do you have a book that you could suggest or recommend to our audience that would help them succeed in opening a brewery?
Sure. I had a good conversation back in May when I took this class to Oregon State with Dick Cantwell. And Dick Cantwell's Brewers Association Guide to Starting Your Own Brewery is a fantastic book. Sam Calagione, of course, was my old boss. So Brewing Up a Business, I got that on my birthday during my interview weekend with them. And I read that in like 2 days, and I loved it. And I've read it probably 2 other times. There's dog ears all over that. I love that book. Beyond the Pale from Ken Grossman is a good one. But if you really want to focus on culture, I would recommend Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard. He is the founder of Patagonia. I think it's a great book on culture and instilling culture and living your values. So you can't walk the talk. If you're saying that you're going to be a sustainable brewery who cares about its employees, prove it. Prove it, show it, make them feel it. So I think that's a great book on culture.
I love that book. In fact, I don't think that one's been recommended in this podcast yet, but I've talked about that recently in some of my blog posts at nathanpierce.me. It's been pretty influential for me.
Yeah, it's a good read, and I love the lessons. It's really, there's a big focus on environmental stewardship that I think with us in working in craft beer, it's such a big strain on resources. I mean, brewing uses a lot of resources, it uses a lot of water, and we really need to focus on how we're treating that water, that wastewater, and how our community is being influenced by it. So I think environmental stewardship is really important with us as brewers. That's a good book about that. I also like Delivering Happiness by Tony Say. He's the founder of Zappos. I think he does a really good job with culture at Zappos, and he talks about his lessons that he learned from a startup enterprise to where they're sitting today. But that's one of my favorite books on culture and business, specifically from a startup standpoint. And then lastly, I think I would say I really like Made to Stick, which is by Dan and Chip Heath. Dan and Chip Heath. Made to Stick is, it talks about branding and how you stick in other people's minds. And with how cluttered the shelves are starting to get with all the craft beer that is out there, it's important that, and between label art and having a story, and a brewery having a story, it's important that you resonate with people because they're going to choose you because there's something about your label, your brand, who you represent that they feel an affiliation with, and they'll choose you over a stranger or over somebody that they know nothing about. So it's really resonating in someone's mind and someone's heart. And I think Made to Stick I think it's like the tagline, something like why some ideas survive and others die. I think it's really important that breweries sort of take notice of that and have their branding, their story, and their authenticity come through in everything that they do.
Yeah, story is super, super important. I'm getting the opportunity to mention lots of last podcasts in this one because Scarlett Lane was in episode 28, and we were talking about how they really personify and create a character for their beers. They're actually named after people. And then when I talked with Tiffany Adamowski from 99 Bottles, the retail store, she said, like, your beer has to have a story.
Yeah, definitely.
So Made to Stick is pretty good.
Yeah, Made to Stick is great. It's been around for probably about 7-8 years. I remember getting it while I was still in business school back in 2007, 8. So somewhere around there it came out. I still think it's really relevant. Anything that they write, both of the Heath brothers write, and anything that Malcolm Gladwell writes, I pretty much read.
Sounds like you're reading a lot.
Yeah, I try when I'm not. Right now, all I'm reading is business plans of other breweries. But I try to read when I can.
Okay, give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Be patient. Be patient. It may not work out perfectly. Things are not going to be easy, and you will be inefficient. But stick through it. You're there for the same reason all of us are there. It's in your heart, and it'll work out. Your beer will speak for itself. Your story will speak for itself. If it doesn't turn out right the first time, guess what? Do it again. It'll be fine. Don't be a perfectionist. None of us are.
Well, thanks for taking the time, Audra. It's been great talking with you, and thanks for all the great advice about keeping my finances and accounting in order and making my operations more efficient. So tell us how we can get in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me too, Nathan. I really appreciate being a guest on your show. You can get a hold of me through my website, brewedforherledger.com. I also have a Facebook page, which is just facebook.com/brewedforherledger. You can find me at Twitter at beermudder, MUDDER, Audra. And LinkedIn, and feel free to Google me. There's several different outlets that are out there for communication. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably my first search result that you'll find. My last name is spelled GAIZIUNAS. And you'll find me. I'm always open for a conversation, text. Feel free to call me. I'll be able to text, call, whatever. Any outlet you feel is necessary. I'm out there. I'm out there for you. I'm out for the craft breweries. My mobile office, I come to the breweries. So looking forward to some conversations.
And I'll have links to all your points of contact in the show notes too.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Nathan. Again, I really appreciate being here. It's been a blast.
Thanks again, Audra Gaijunas, for being on MicroBrewr podcast. That was so much information. Thanks for all of your tips and info about keeping all of the accounting and bookkeeping running smoothly in a craft brewery. Listeners, don't forget to take advantage of Audra's offer to answer any of your questions. She'll watch the comment section for the next 30 days. So go to the show notes and leave your questions at microbrewer.com/session31. And please check out Brewed for Her Ledger and thank Audra for being on the show and for answering our questions too. So be sure to take advantage of that. You can find links to get in touch with Audra Gaijunas and Brewed for Her Ledger at the show notes for this episode at microbrewer.com/session31. And I added some links to important resources about accounting information too. Feel free to hit me up anytime. You could send me an email from the MicroBrewr website at microbrewer.com/contact. Or MicroBrewr Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook at MicroBrewr. And I am on Untapped at Nathan Pierce. Don't forget to subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, support your local brewery. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to MicroBrewr Podcast with Nathan Pierce. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.
If you want more resources for starting a craft brewery, check out microbrewer.com, microbrewer.com. If you want to become a Cicerone certified beer server, check out beerexamschool.com for free study guide and flashcards for the certified beer server exam. beerexamschool.com.